Hello, vinyl community, and welcome to Vinyl Tag 2020. I have to say this was pretty interesting to go through all of this. It actually sparked my mind to create a couple of other videos as I was going through. I realized some of these questions can't be answered easily or quickly, but I'm not gonna rant about this. Let's get right into it because it's gonna be a long one. There's 20 questions. So the first question was best find, and I got to tell you, this one was a little difficult because there's a lot of different ways you can interpret that. The best find, to me, because I'm a bargain hunter, I dig through Goodwill and places like that, so I could show off my dollar albums that are worth significantly more. But I sort of took this more of a traditional way and was looking for a grail that I happened to come across, and that one was an easy pick. This is the Feminine Complex. If you're not familiar with it, it's a 1969 all-girl garage band. This is the only album that they ever produced, and I came across this at my local record store. It's still in shrink, still has the stickers on it. Absolutely minty copy. I encourage you to listen to this if you're not familiar with who they are. It's definitely an interesting sound. It's definitely 60s, and it's just a really solid album. There's some really great songs on here, especially if you like 1960s garage band stuff. But the all-girl aspect of it, definitely different than anything else you heard from the late 60s. Highly encourage you to listen to that. The next one was favorite album, and I took this one to mean the best album released in 2019. And there was a lot of good music that was released in 2019, but I came across this band here. This is The Who, and if you're not familiar with them, they are a Mongolian progressive folk metal band. Now that sounds like a mouthful, and it sounds like a whole bunch of words that don't really go together, but I encourage you to listen to this. The best place to start, look up on YouTube for their video for Wolf Totem. There's a couple of other ones, The Great Genghis Khan, a few other ones. All of their videos are very high production. They're definitely worth watching. But The Who, they play traditional instruments. There's some Mongolian throat singing involved, and it's definitely more upbeat, more rock, and very, very fascinating sound to listen to these guys. I'm very happy to have this in my collection. I even went out and found them. They are touring the world and actually do a lot of different concert dates. I caught them here in Tampa, Florida in early December, and it was a phenomenal concert. This is definitely one of my favorite ones that I found in 2019, without a doubt. Novelty records, a few that I could have gone with from there, but I thought this one was interesting. In fact, this is so new to me that I haven't even opened it yet. I haven't given it a listen, and it's still in the shrink, but I'll put this up here. And this is Porno Sonic. This is from Ron Jeremy, and it's a collection of unreleased 1970s porno music. And I'm very curious to open this up and to give it a spin. Definitely a unique sound if you're familiar with what this is referencing, and certainly a novelty item for sure. Looking forward to that one. An homage cover. I gotta be honest. I'm not real familiar with covers as much as I would like to be. I've gone down some rabbit holes, and I've educated myself to a certain extent, and I probably have stuff that would be really great to show, but I'm gonna cheap out, and I'm just gonna go with the Elvis and Clash like everyone else is doing, and we'll just skip over that because that's not very interesting. Number 5, the B-side deep cut question. I'm taking a different angle on this, and partially that's because I think it's more of a public service announcement. I could go with this traditional answer to this, and I'll just basically say this is about Nightwish. If you're not familiar with the band Nightwish, or you are familiar and you're not interested, you can skip forward a little bit because I'm going to talk about this for a minute. If you're an old Nightwish fan and you thought that basically anything since Tarja left is not worth listening to, you need to revisit it, basically. Yes, we can all agree that Annette was not Tarja and that the band changed a lot. But if you're not familiar with Floor Jansen, you need to become familiar with Floor. Um, Best starting point. And if you're not familiar with Nightwish at all, I don't know if you should start with Tarja, because that's their origins, and they kind of, I wouldn't say they created it, but they sort of brought mainstream to the symphonic metal genre. Nightwish is from Finland, and they're a symphonic metal band, and I don't really know how to describe that other than once you've heard it, you realize that that's the best way to describe it. Tarja is an absolutely excellent singer. Their sound is fantastic from the early years. But seek out, especially if you're an old Nightwish fan and you're not familiar with Floor, seek out the video from Wacken 2013. Now there's 2 official videos for this, so make sure you get the Wacken 2013 video of Ghost Love Score with Floor. And it will absolutely reignite your interest in Nightwish. Nightwish is back, and Floor takes it to the next level. She makes Nightwish what Nightwish should have been in the beginning. Absolutely incredible. What I'm doing here for the B-side deep cut, if you're not familiar, in 2019, Floor went out on her own, and she joined up with a Dutch television show called Beste Zangers. And Beste Zangers is what it sounds like, it's Best Singers. And she was part of this show for 8 episodes, which is their entire season. There's a YouTuber by the name of Denise Haas, and she's done some English subtitles for the show. Now, unfortunately, YouTube took down a bunch of her videos, but she's moved a lot of them to Daily Motion. But seek these out and watch them in sequence. But watch the whole show. Don't just go out and watch Floor's videos. Watch the whole show. It's 8 hours, and it's 8 hours well spent. But if you don't come away from watching Floor's performance on Beste Zangers and reach the conclusion that she is the best vocalist currently in operation, then I don't know what your problem is, because Floor is absolutely phenomenal. Her performances on this show in Beste Zangers will blow your mind. Absolutely blow your mind. Now, if you're not familiar with any of these, don't start here. Do not start here. Go back, find Nightwish, see what they're all about, find Floor, do the Ghost Love Score video that I told you about, then find Romanticide to see what the band's all about on some of their heavier stuff, find Poet and the Pendulum, find The Greatest Show on Earth. There's a whole huge rabbit hole that you need to go down to find Floor, find this band, and find her vocal talent. But once you've digested that, look for this, and this is Floor doing many different styles of music that you always wondered if she was capable of doing, and she does do them, and she does them better than anyone else. Absolutely fantastic. Okay, so now we can continue on. This was my big interruption in the list of questions. All right, so what do we have after that? Funky. I gotta be honest with you. I have a lot of records that presumably fall into the funky category, and I haven't listened to them yet. I collected a little too fast, and to be honest, probably at least half of my collection I've never even heard before. But I figure I have my whole life to do it. But I come across some deals and I buy huge collections. So I could cheap out and do Funkadelic and stuff like that. I could do other albums and other obscure bands, but I'm just gonna go here. All right, because the one song, even if not the whole album, the one song, Superstitious, sorry, but this is funk. This is the bar. Has to be. Funkiest song ever. All right, Weird Shelf Buddies. Now, I cheated a little bit here. I didn't go through all of my shelves and pull everything out and see what's next to each other. I went to my Discogs and went through the list on Discogs. Now, these 2 albums don't reside together on my shelf because one of them's in the miscellaneous column, but it really stuck out to me when I was flipping through Discogs and just thought it was absolutely entirely weird and kind of creepy. But it starts off with Jim Croce, Don't Mess Around with Jim. And we all know this one. So don't mess around with Jim, but right underneath that is Jim Jones' recording of his final sermons at Jonestown. If you're not familiar with history, you look this up and you'll see why those two together just, yeah, that was a little creepy to come across on my list. I was there. A few of things that I could have picked for this one, but back in the very early 1990s, I happened to be at a little bar in the middle of nowhere in Buffalo, New York. The White Horse Inn, it was called. Little tiny place. Played live music on the weekends. I don't think you could have stuffed more than 75 people in there if you wanted to. And I happened to catch Molly Hatchet, of all bands. Now, at that time, they were still pretty big. They could have gotten a much, much larger venue. But it was a little quiet place in the middle of nowhere in a back residential area. And we all rocked out to Molly Hatchet for hours. This was a phenomenal little show, and just one of those weird circumstances. I didn't go there for them. I was just going to the bar to meet a friend, and they happened to be playing. And it was just one of those serendipitous moments, and it turned out to be a great night. Wish I had an OG copy. And actually, I'll get back to this artist later. I do have an OG copy of Cold Fact, but I do not have an OG copy of Coming From Reality, and I would love to have it. I have the Light in the Attic releases, and I have a South African release of Cold Fact, which I'll get into in a minute. But I'd love to have an OG copy of this, whether it's South African or American or Australian or wherever. But I'd love to have an OG copy of one of these. A discography you own. This was another one that kind of threw me off. Now I could have gone, Genesis or Pink Floyd or, any of the usual stuff. But I happened to come across one, and this was on a recommendation. My local record store is really, really good, and this guy knew I was into progressive rock, and this was a band that I was not familiar with. I never did a deep dive into progressive rock back in the day, but I've become interested in it. He bought a collection of records, and I wound up buying, without even realizing it, basically the entire studio collection of Gentle Giant. I'm missing one album out of here. I've listened to Octopus, but I have not listened to the rest of them. I'm basically waiting for the right timing to have a few days to sit down and go through this and really kind of try and ingest all of their discography. It's a lot to take in. But yeah, just surprisingly, when I went through my list, I didn't realize I had so much Gentle Giant, but I do. And that's my answer to that question. Let's see, unique center label. Had quite a few, but I always remembered this one. And again, this is one of those, I'm not familiar with my records as much as I should be, and I probably have some other stuff that's interesting. But I've always liked this one. And this is off of Operation Mindcrime by Queensryche. And I thought it was rather interesting to have that shadow figure of Lenin, given what the album is about. And I thought it just fits in very nicely, and it's definitely unique, specifically made just for that album. Pre-band. This one kind of shocked me, and again, I'm not as up on my musical history as I would like to be, and I'm sure I have other stuff in here someplace that would be a better selection. But I grew up in the 80s, and there was this particular individual. I knew him as an actor from Escape from New York, and I knew him as a singer under the pseudonym of Buster Poindexter. But I did not know David Johansen as part of this group. And it kind of blew my mind when I was listening to it and I recognized something, and I was looking over the album and I said, David Johansen? Wait a minute. Buster Poindexter? That guy is in this proto-punk band? Dressed up in drag? What? Huh? Blew my mind. I had no idea. Now, one would say that this isn't necessarily a pre-band, that this is where David Johansen actually made his mark. But to me, at least, I knew him otherwise, and this to me is his pre-band, from what I knew him as. Musical book movie. I don't have the movie here because I've lent it out again, because I lend it out constantly, but that's Searching for Sugar Man. And this goes to the cold fact that I was showing before, or not the cold fact, but the Coming From Reality, for the one I'd like an OG copy of. If you have not seen this movie, you have to see this movie. Period. Okay? Searching for Sugar Man won the 2011 Oscar for Best Documentary. It's a very well produced movie. The story is absolutely fascinating, and you don't have to be a music lover to appreciate it. So sit down with your significant other or somebody, bring a friend, bring whatever, and sit down and watch this movie if you haven't seen it yet. Like I say, I lend it out all the time, and it's kind of funny because when I lend it out to somebody, I never have to ask them, have you watched it yet? Because after they watch it, they immediately call me and will say, holy cow, I can't believe this. It's like, yeah, well, you've been sitting on it for 2 months. I've been waiting for you to watch it. He's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And that's happened multiple times to me now. But definitely know somebody that's actually seen it, because they will talk about it at length. Fascinating, fascinating movie. Great story. I won't give away it. The one thing I will say, don't research the movie before you watch it. Don't Google it. Go into it blind. You will appreciate it more if you go into it blind. Okay? That's all I will say about it, but you have to watch it. Underrated album. And there was a lot to choose from, but I have certain albums that I was introduced to artists that are traditionally considered to be their weakest albums. This was one of them, but I personally love this album. This is on a heavy rotation for me. And this is Joe Satriani, Flying in a Blue Dream. This was the first album that had lyrics. If you're familiar with Joe Satriani, he's a guitarist, and most of his albums are instrumental. And he sings on this. And a lot of people didn't like it. It was not very well received. But I think it's fantastic. I Believe, watch the video, listen to the song. I Believe, I think, is absolutely fantastic. Strange, Flying in a Blue, just there's a ton of great songs on here. It's not given much credit because he's actually singing on it when he's known as an instrumentalist, but I think this is a very underrated album. I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I listen to it quite a bit. Batting Average. This was one of those ones, there was a lot to choose from, but I had one particular artist that I came across, and I recognized that I love every single one of their albums. There's not a lot, and I only have a couple, but every single one of them I've listened to end to end, and every single song is fantastic. And that's Sade. They release an album about once every 8 or 9 years, give or take, but every single one of the albums is solid. Her singing is fantastic. The band is in sync with her. They're tight. It's beautiful music. If you're not familiar with Sade, I would assume that most people here have heard Sade before. At least Smooth Operator, if nothing else. But if you're younger and you haven't come across Sade, because she basically hit it big in the 80s and throughout the 90s, some night when you have your significant other over and you're just looking for some nice background music, you know, instead of picking up Marvin Gaye or Al Green or something like that, put some Sade on. This is absolutely fantastic. I love listening to that. Those are in very heavy rotation for myself as well. Same album, different cover. I had a couple of these, but this is one that I just recently found out about, which really shocked me because I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan. Absolutely love Pink Floyd. But I never knew that Wish You Were Here actually has 2 different pictures, depending on if you had the US pressing or the UK pressing. If you look at Burning Man, one of them has him leaning in and the other one has him leaning back, and there's a different contrast on the buildings in the background. So I thought that was fascinating, that Wish You Were Here, which by the way is the best Pink Floyd album, has two different covers. I never knew that. I just never paid attention that there was a difference between the two. Album you bought cheap but is now valuable. I didn't know how to take this. You know, I've obviously have my Goodwill finds that I got for $1, but I haven't been collecting vinyl for a long time. I'm actually only a couple years into this, so there's not much that I've purchased that has increased in price. Some of my Light in the Attic records that I've purchased have gone significantly up in price, but this one kind of stuck out to me as being a little bit odd, and I don't know why, but I bought the Dazed and Confused soundtrack on a closeout on yellow vinyl for like $10, maybe a year ago, give or take. And suddenly it's listing for $60 a pop, and they just recently sold one for $50. So somehow it's rare, but this is the whole colored vinyl limited edition jack up the prices for no particular reason that I really despise. I'm not a real fan of this, and I wish it would stop, because it's ridiculous. Like I say, I bought this on closeout for $10. It's not a $60 album. It's a good album. There's a nice collection of music on here, but it's not a $60 piece of plastic. I'm sorry. That just really irritates me to no end. These splatter limited edition whatever. That's for another video. I won't go into it. You know what I'm talking about. Favorite drummer. This is gonna seem a little cliche because of the timing, but I gotta tell you, I grew up in a border town. Where I lived, I could pull in Toronto, Canada, radio stations just as good as I could Buffalo, New York, and Rochester, and a couple of other places. So I grew up on Canadian radio, because quite honestly, the Toronto radio stations were better. But yeah, I'm sorry, but Neil, rest in peace. Yeah, Neil Peart, not just as a drummer, he was the lyricist for Rush, and if you know Rush and you know their lyrics, yeah, that alone is. But as a drummer, wow, just wow. I mean, okay, you can say that he doesn't necessarily put in a good feel to a lot of his songs and things, but as a technical drummer, and if you've seen the size of his kit, holy crap. I saw them in concert when he had the dual-sided one, and halfway through they spun the whole thing around, and it was just, oh my God. Neil, rest in peace. Sorry, man, but greatest of all time. There's some competition, and it's arguable. Gotta love Neil, though. Absolutely gotta love Neil Peart. Turning 20. Yeah, 2000 was part of what I call the kid years. And during the kid years, I didn't listen to a lot of contemporary music. Music consisted of Barney, and eventually morphed into the soundtrack from Grease, every single day, twice a day, for 3 years. I had daughters, so that also morphed into Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears, and then we went through the goth phase, and it became Disturbed, and it became Linkin Park and Slipknot and yada yada. But I didn't listen to a lot of music back then, and I'm now trying to fill that gap. And to be honest, I think this might be the only one that I have from the 2000s, but it's a good one. And unfortunately, everyone else is kind of doing the same thing. But yeah, Radiohead Kid A. Absolutely love Radiohead. Again, I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan, and I know people are saying, oh, there's a huge line between them, but they're very different from Pink Floyd, but they're very good. The one thing I like about this, though, is that this is an OG copy. And what a lot of people don't know, what I didn't know, and I thought was fascinating, is the OG copies of Radiohead are not released on a 12-inch. They're released on a double 10-inch gatefold. So I have an OG 10-inch double gatefold of Kid A, and this is my turning 20 this year. Trilogy of albums. Again, this was a difficult one, and there was definitely a ton that I could pick from. But I went back, and basically the answer to this one is the trilogy of albums that had the biggest impact on me. And when I discovered, now I'm a kid of the '80s, so I knew who Genesis was. you couldn't have lived through the '80s and not know Phil Collins and Genesis. But it took an extra step to go back and listen to the Peter Gabriel Genesis. Very different stuff. And I liked it. And then I started getting into Peter Gabriel's solo career. And Peter Gabriel's first 3 albums had a gigantic impact on me, especially this one. Well, it started with this one. One of the first albums I ever had, this one on 8-track of all things. But Melt, oh my God. Yeah, absolutely, especially in the world of progressive rock, Peter Gabriel's solo career, all of his albums are absolutely fascinating and fantastic. Highly recommend to anyone. But that trilogy, his first 3 albums, really influenced the scene and put a lot of different bands on the map. So that's my 20 questions. Again, from that, there's a couple of different videos that I'm sure are going to spring out of this. I'm very anxious to do one of them because 2019 for me was a huge year of discovery. I discovered a lot of bands, and it was very difficult making choices on some of these questions, but I'm going to do a deeper dive and go into a lot of the bands that I found in 2019 and try and introduce them to you. So until then, I will see you on the flip side.